Hi, my name's Spencer. I'm the startup supervisor and lead de-icer at Falls. And we're just going to run through our procedure on how we de-ice and how we do our startups in the morning. There's a lot of things that are maybe new when towies start learning to start de-icing and things like that, so there's a lot to get used to and a fair bit of risk involved if we're not doing things the right way. So this can hopefully give you just a little bit of a rundown and a bit of a summary on how we go about things in the safest way that we can. The first thing that we're going to do basically before we even leave mountain office is we're going to be doing our buddy checks. So as you can see, I've put on my harness already, but Harry, if you'd like to come and give me a little buddy check here. So we're checking that all our carabiners are locked up. That's really important. You can see that Harry's is locked here. This one's locked here. You want to also make sure that there's no twists in any of the straps to make sure our leg buckles are done up too. You can see yours are done up. And then if you want to check my back as well.
Yeah, cool. No twists, nice and straight. You want to check mine as well?
Yeah, that looks really good.
Awesome.
Alright, so when we get to the tower, the first thing you want to think about is where you're going to park your snowmobile. If we're going to be de-icing in the morning, there could be potentially over 100 kilos of ice that we're going to hit off that tower when we get up there. So if you park your sled right underneath a cross beam or the sheaves or something, you could potentially damage your sled. So try and park it maybe a little bit uphill of where it is, or maybe a better option is even to park it a little bit windward of where the tower is. That way when you're knocking the ice off, it's going to blow away from where your sled is. That can be quite tricky to do depending on the tower that you're at. Maybe it's a steeper pitch, like let's say Scott's or something like that. So when you're approaching the tower on your sled, try and keep that in mind on where you think you'll be able to stop your sled. When you get to the tower, you're going to stand at the base first of all, and then you're going to have a look and see which sheaves are spinning and not spinning. So we do that with the radio protocol to make sure that we're not missing any towers, and to also make sure that everyone is safe on the ground also. So let's say we have someone down the bottom of the lift here. They're going to be standing by, so they're called the driver, and they're the person that will drive the lift. And then we're also going to have our climbers or our de-icers, and we could have maybe 3, 4, even 5 de-icers at the time standing by at the base of those lift towers. We normally de-ice from top to bottom, and the reason for that is that's because that's where we get most of our ice. So generally our lift towers are going to be icy at the top and maybe not so icy down the bottom. So we want to get those really bad ones first. That way we're not creating as much damage to the haul rope. It's also a lot easier to walk down a hill than up a hill too. So when we get to the top, all our de-icers are in line at their respective towers from the top down, and then we'll all call in that we're ready and standing at the base of that tower and ready for a creep. Creep is where we just move the lift just a little bit to see if those sheaves are stuck. So let's say we're at the base of this tower here. I'll call in to my driver that I'm standing at the base of Tower 2 Summit and ready for a creep, and then they'll repeat that back to me. Then I'll be looking at the sheaves, making sure that when this lift moves, that all of my sheaves are spinning. And I like to check each individual one, because when it can be really dark and maybe a bit foggy, it can be quite hard to see. So I'm always looking to make sure that every single one is spinning, and I can take my time. If I think I'm missed something, maybe I'll even ask for another creep. But let's say that 2 of our sheaves here are stuck, then we'll have to go up and climb that to free that moving component before it gets damaged. So I'll let my driver know that there's a stop or a stuck sheave on Tower 2 Summit, and that I'll be climbing Tower 2. Alright, cool. So we're here at the base of our tower that has some stuck sheaves, and I'm about to climb the ladder here, but the thing I want to do first is give the ladder a nice big hit to get as much ice off it here before I start to climb, because that's going to make my life a lot easier when I'm up there. There could be some pretty big chunks, so once I hit it, I'm going to move out of the way. So I'll give this a big hit right on the side, and then stand back just to see if there's any ice falling down. Maybe give that another couple of hits. And there's not much ice coming down on that one, unfortunately, because it's pretty cold out here today. So we're going to have to climb through any ice that's on the ladder. If we're hanging on the ladder halfway up and we continue to hit ice, if that ice is falling onto us, that can make us fall off the ladder, and that could be really bad. We're going to be climbing with our hooks here. Now these hooks are going to stop us from hitting the ground, except they're not necessarily going to stop us from having an injury if we fall off this ladder. So I always treat my climbing on a tower like I don't have any hooks, because if I fall, that I could be in some really big trouble. So I want to make sure that no matter what, I'm not going to be falling. When we're climbing up this ladder, it is going to be quite icy, so we're going to have to climb through all of that ice. If we're hitting ice off when we're halfway off the ladder, then that falling ice could make us fall off that ladder there. So we're going to have to climb up, and then we can de-ice the ladder from the top down on our way back down to the ground once we've got everything spinning. Right, when we're climbing, you guys might already remember that we want to have our hooks above our waist and as high as we can. That way we're minimizing the distance that we're going to fall if we do. We also want to have 3 points of contact on our ladders at all times. So we're not going, legs free, only one hand, one leg. We're always kind of moving nice and slow and concise. That way, if we're holding onto any ice and things start to break off, we're not going to slip off our ladder here. You also want to have your hooks on different ladder rungs here. That way, if maybe there was any structural damage on the ladder from maybe a chair hitting it in high winds, or maybe even a cat hitting this ladder, it reduces the likelihood that any of these ladder rungs are going to break if we keep our hooks on opposite ladders here. So I'm going to climb on up now and keep my hooks nice and high. And I'm keeping 3 points of contact the whole time. Alright, so now that we're at the top of the tower here, it's really important to always stay anchored into your tower. That way you're not going to fall off. Here on a lot of the Doppelmayrs, we have these big anchor points here, and you can see that I've chosen to connect myself to these ones here, which are really close to the ladder. My lanyards are actually quite stretchy, so I'm going to keep mine here. That way when I move over towards my sheaves, I know that my lanyards are right out of the way. That way with all these moving parts here, nothing's going to get stuck in them. If you do have any shorter lanyards, there are some closer anchor points here. But just be mindful of where your lanyards are going to be hanging when we're creeping those lifts. So when we're de-icing our sheaves here, these two that we can see here, this one here is stuck and so is this one. Now there are certain places that you can and can't hit your sheaves. But firstly, the thing that I like to do the most is actually not even hit the sheaves at all. I like to hit these things here, which are called side plates. Now, those side plates there, they're steel, okay? And we have aluminium hammers. So when we're hitting with our aluminium hammers, they're not gonna do any damage or no significant damage to our infrastructure here. There are some other places which we'll get to in a little bit where you could do some damage, and we'll have to be really careful around those areas. But firstly, things I'm gonna do is try and crack that bond of ice between the side plate and the sheave here in that gap there. So you can hit these quite hard. Try and crack that sheave plate. Try to get any ice in that join out of there. And hopefully that might be enough to get our sheaves spinning though. If it's not, maybe the ice is really stubborn and really clear. You might want to start hitting your sheaves, okay? Now with our sheaves here, this part here, that outer ring on our sheaves, that's also steel. So we can hit those, but maybe not as hard as our side plates here. So I'm gonna give those a bit of a tap now. Maybe a little bit here too. Okay, so hopefully that should do it. If we go for a creep now, I'm going to stand nice and clear and far away from the sheaves or anything moving. That way I know that I'm not going to get pulled into anything. Things to keep in mind is especially your lanyards, but also things like your shoelaces and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you're really clear. So I'm going to stand right back here. I'm far away from my sheaves, and now I'm going to radio into my driver that I'm standing clear on the top of Tower 2 summit and I'm ready for a creep. Then everyone else will also call in from the top down, and that way the driver knows that everyone is clear, ready for a creep, standing where I am, and then he can move that lift once with that creep, and then we'll see whether our sheaves are spinning or not spinning. Let's say our ice here is really stubborn it still isn't spinning yet. The last thing that you can try and hit is our inner sheave here. Now this part, that part there is not steel, so we have to be very careful, and it is very easy to crack and break. If you absolutely have to hit this part of the sheave, go very gently. I like to sometimes even use the bottom of my hammer. Just give it a little tap. Stuff like that. You don't really need to go any harder than that. By hitting the other parts of the sheave and the side plate, you should be able to get the sheave spinning, no problems. While we're also up here, not only are we removing the ice from the sheave so that the components can spin freely, but we also, if there's a lot of ice up here, that poses a risk to our guests, as well as anyone else that might be traveling underneath the chair. So we have to make sure that we clear any heavy parts of ice and get that onto the ground. That way it's not going to fall throughout the day. So what I like to do also is I like to de-ice my lift tower from top to bottom. So the first thing I'm going to hit is our cross beam here. So this big part, you can hit this quite hard. Hopefully crack some ice off here, maybe work my way along if I need to. Then also my handrails here, I can quite hard. Hopefully that's clearing lots and lots of ice that's falling onto the ground. You also might want to have a couple of hits on your catwalk, maybe if there's some ice built up underneath. Okay, once that's done, then you're basically right to climb down. There are a few points though that you would be careful not to hit. Anything electrical, any part of plastic like this, you want to be really careful not to hit any of this. You also might see that we have some stop buttons on our lift towers here. You want to make sure that we're not pressing our stop buttons on the lift towers or hitting them with our hammers. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're clear as well before we climb down. We don't want any ice built up around our stop buttons while we're up here either, because as that ice melts, it could even press the stop button partway through the day as well. Another place you want to be careful not to hit is this red thing here. What that is, that's called a brake fork. And basically, if this cable here was to derail and fall off our sheaves on this side, hopefully these things here called cable catchers would catch that cable instead of it going onto the ground. That would also break this thing here, which would stop the lift. Inside this little red tube here is what looks like this. This is called a brake fork here. And this here has a little weak spot, if you can see right in there. So when the cable lands on this fork, it will break it here, and that will break our circuit, which will stop the lift. But what could happen is if we're de-icing, we could accidentally hit that brake fork. So we want to be careful that we're not hitting that brake fork at all with our hammers. I think it's really important to know where they are. So they're actually going to be after the first sheave on the incoming side on any of our sheave assemblies here. So I know that it's going to be after this first sheave here. So even if this was covered in ice, I would know to be really careful where I'm putting my hammer. Alrighty, so we're going to climb down now. So I'm going to do the opposite of what I did just before, but I'm still going to keep my hooks nice and high above my waist so I can minimize that distance I might fall if I was to fall. I'm also going to de-ice the ladder top down as well. So if there's any ice that I'm coming across on my way, then I'm going to try and get that off as I climb past it. That way nothing's going to fall on me compared to if I was climbing up earlier. Now it's time for me to start to climb down. Again, I'm keeping my 3 points of contact